When I was 7, my older sister and I took our first vacation without our parents. At the airport, while Dad chatted with the pilots, Mom gave us 2 really clear instructions. First, obey the flight attendants. And second, and this was equally important, when Grandma and Grandpa meet you at Los Angeles International Airport, make sure that they find a payphone and call me to let me know that you got there safely. Payphones, for those of you who are young enough that you don't know what this is, they're like cell phones that people would leave planted on walls, but you had to put quarters in them and anyone could use them. Make sure you find, or a dime as the case may be, make sure you find, or that you tell them to find a payphone and call us when you arrive at LAX. Mom promised that she would stay by the phone at home, awaiting the call. This was a different era of plane travel. And so the stewardesses gave us meals and decks of cards to play with on the flight. After we were at cruising altitude, the co-pilot came back and invited us up into the cockpit, where he showed us the instruments and the Cascade Mountains out the windows. Soon enough, we were back in our seats and touching down at LAX, with visions of Minnie and Mickey already dancing in our heads. As promised, Grandma and Grandpa met us at the gate, and we excitedly began to tell them about everything we had seen on the flight and done. 2 hours later, nearly to Disneyland, my sister remembered to tell Grandpa that he was supposed to call our mom. Grandpa stopped at a gas station, found a payphone, talked for a while, and sheepishly came back to the car, a little red in the face. He didn't say how the conversation went. He didn't have to say how the conversation went. We all knew what Mom had said, and my sister and I also kind of knew that she knew that we hadn't really been listening when she told us to make sure to tell Grandpa to call. Now, perhaps you've had that conversation with a family member who apparently wasn't listening when you told them to check in with you. Not via a payphone, of course. Now it's that text that doesn't come after we've already sent 5 messages to them and there's no reply. Or, maybe you've had that conversation, and when that person finally does remember to actually reply or to check in with you, there's a sense of relief. Thank God you're okay. But at least an equal, if not additional, level of frustration. Weren't you listening when I told you to contact me? Listening is one of those things that I think it's kind of like driving, where everyone thinks they're way better at it than they really are. I mean, how hard is it really to listen to someone? And how hard is it, for that matter, to guide that 3,000-pound vehicle from point A to point B without bumping into anything? Everyone's great at listening, just like everyone is great at driving, right? Or not, because just because it's easy to push a gas pedal and turn a steering wheel doesn't mean that it's easy to be a great driver. And just because it's easy to hear someone's voice and the words they're saying doesn't mean that it's easy to be a great listener. Present company excluded, of course. I know you hang on my every word and have deep anticipation as to whatever witticism or insight I'm going to offer next. It's just that in general, when someone's been talking for a little while, we have a tendency to start to tune them out a little bit. Or if someone gives us a few too many instructions, or a few too many rules, it's easy to just sort of let their voice trail into the background of the world. Mind you, that kind of tuning out is a really different thing than the teenage boy who is actively trying to ignore what his father is saying. That tuning out that happens when someone's just been talking for a while or given a few too many instructions is a really different thing than actively ignoring someone that you don't want to listen to, an authority figure or a politician you disagree with or something like that. In this case, there's really no malice. There's no disrespect intended. It's just, well, there've been a bunch of instructions given to my sister and myself already, and we were excited. We wanted to see Disney. My sister and I undoubtedly heard our mom tell us to tell Grandpa to call when we landed, but by then we sure weren't actually listening to her. We heard her, but we weren't listening. Instead, we were thinking about the flight and the rides and the warm weather and the vacation and the time with our grandparents. Not malicious, but not really great listening either. Now, perhaps you have had that conversation where you realize someone is hearing the words that are coming out of your mouth, but not listening to anything you're saying. Perhaps you've already had that experience this morning. Not a malicious, active, I'm going to ignore you now sense, but just the more subtle, well, look at that, the bass player from the Monkees died, type of distractions that cause us to not really hear one another or to listen to what they've said, and our attention drifts and we're not paying attention. Perhaps you've had that experience. We've been there too. We've been there too. And as today's scripture shows us, Jesus has been there too. Jesus has had that same experience. But I say to you that listen, Jesus said, as he realized that many in the crowd were still kind of hearing his voice, but no longer actually listening to his message. The crowd included his family, the disciples, a variety of folks whom he had just healed. This wasn't a crowd full of soldiers or centurions or Pharisees or folks actively trying to avoid or challenge his message. These were his friends, his supporters, his family, true believers. And even there, maybe they knew what he was going to say, or maybe they were dazzled by the sun flickering through the fields around the Sea of Galilee. Or maybe they were formulating a response to his earlier comments about how the poor, blessed, and the excluded will be rejoicing. Or maybe they were just excited to get on with the adventure and see where Jesus was going to take them next. But I say to you that are still listening, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Turn the other cheek. Give to those who ask. Do to others as you would have them do to you. It's easy to love those who love you. It's easy to be good to those who are good to you, but love your enemies. Do good. Lend and expect nothing in return. Nothing except a reward of being closer to God. For God is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Therefore be merciful, just as God is merciful. Well, I suspect that those who listened agreed with everything that Jesus said. And I suspect everyone else would have agreed with it if they'd been listening. And I suspect everyone, both those who listened and those who didn't, took Jesus' instructions as a really good set of unachievable goals. I'm not sure much has changed in the 2,000 years since then. That those who listen and hear Jesus' message in the passage, I think, still agree with it. To do unto others, to love your enemies, to be kind to one another. And I still think that those who don't listen to Jesus but hear parts of this message in movies or in pop culture, the Golden Rule in particular, they generally agree with it. But as soon as we say, no, really, we are to love and extend God's love to those people, countries, corporations, or entities which persecute us, or we say something like, no, really, we are to do unto others as we want them to do unto us, the reply always comes of, well, that's good in concept, but in the real world we have to. Jesus' message of compassion and peacemaking is dismissed. As soon as it becomes impractical in our lives. Which just kind of makes me wonder how much, even today, anyone really listens to this part of Scripture. There's no malice intended. But we aren't listening to Jesus in our society, which always advocates a strong and violent response to any form of aggression. We aren't listening to Jesus in our society, which views compassion and peacemaking as signs of weakness. We aren't listening to Jesus in our society, where we all fall into the trap of only listening to those who sound like us. We're only kind to those who agree with us. We only forgive those who view the world like us, and only love those who look like us. And we certainly aren't listening to Jesus when we take the Golden Rule and all that hangs off of it and imply that it is good in theory, but impractical in the real world. Maybe that's backwards. Maybe the Golden Rule is good in practice, and the real world, in theory, is badly addicted to retribution and domination and power and violence. But who wants to listen to that? Amen.